Hello, I'm Dr. Steve Sims, Director of the Philadelphia Child and Family Therapy Training Center, and we have a special opportunity today. Joining us is Dr. Harry Aponte. Dr. Aponte is the former director of the Philadelphia Child and Family Therapy Training Center, and I think we're going to be calling it the clinic from here on out. And he's also retired clinical associate professor of couple and family therapy from Drexel University. Welcome, Harry.
Thank you. Glad to be here with you.
I read your 1976 article about the family school interview, an eco-structural approach to family therapy. And I need to really let you know that when I discovered this article in the 80s, it riveted me because what it did is said, Steve, you have been focused on the child, the family, but what you really have been missing is the child and family in their broader social ecology. And that family therapy needs to expand their eyes on it. Can you talk with us about your thinking? And it seems so obvious now, Harry, but it was a big, big deal from my perspective.
I came from a background of growing up in Harlem in New York and in the South Bronx, and my family, we were sort of like on the edge when it comes to income and what resources we had, and when I thought about families and what family therapy was about, it seemed just focused on family, but I was so conscious of growing up in an environment, a community where people were all struggling for income and struggling to manage life, and it wasn't just family; it was the whole community that was in trouble. So that it just seemed to me a limited viewpoint, a limited perspective. Albeit it was very important, it was very useful, but I also was very conscious that at least for the people where I lived, it would take more than just looking at the family in order to help them, because people were at low income and people were struggling with a lot of violence in the community. So it was really very much community and family. When Sal Minuchin invited me to come to the child guidance clinic, I was at the Menninger Clinic. He had just written Families of the Slums, and then I got a call from him, and he asked me if I would come join him, because he just felt that given my background, given where I came from in Harlem and in South Bronx, that I would be comfortable in the community that he was working in, which was the 17th and Bainbridge here in South Philadelphia. And so I ran to it. I thought, I'm going to be seeing my own family here with the families that are living here, and I know the community. I know what the circumstances are. I was really anxious to join him because he was having problems relating to the community and they relating to the child guidance clinic. In fact, there were people from the local community were breaking windows of the child guidance clinic at that time. I met with them because they had representatives. They were going to tell the clinic how it was going to run itself and so on. And I said, well, that's not going to work. I found the leadership in the community. I made friends with that leadership, a guy named Jim Lester. Began then to figure out, well, how do we together the clinic with the community? He had real control and influence over that community. And we had a good clinic there. And I said, why don't we just partner? We became friendly and understood one another and got trust in one another. And he raised some money and bought a building, had it renovated, went to the University of Penn, got people who were African Americans who were in the educational program there, and started a school. We went to the superintendent of schools, and he said, well, I'll give you their names, but you have to, whatever you do, you have to do it after 3:00. I don't want you competing with our schools, even though these kids aren't going to school, So he gave us the names. We went to the homes, we went to the families, we talked to them. The kids came in droves, and we had students from Penn who were learning to become teachers, and we had people from the community who they looked up to, and they went to the homes, they talked to the families, and the next thing you knew, these kids who were not attending school were attending our school, and they were running to school. These were kids who were not attending school at all. Sal was doing the family therapy thing, and I was saying, that's wonderful, that's really interesting, that's very important, but we need to involve the community. There were a relationship between the families and the clinic and the school that we set up for these kids. It was really my dream, to say family therapy is a good phrase, but given where I came from, which was the same kind of neighborhood that I was working in at that time, you have to relate to the community and not just to the family. The families are really important, but family in context is more important. It's more relevant. It's where people are living, where people are suffering, where people are struggling, and we need to be able to relate to that community on that basis.
Because I find today a lot of people pay lip service to strength-based, but I think you and your team were practicing that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it was a conviction that came from my own personal life experience. It didn't feel new to me. It just felt logical to me. They wanted to work with us. They wanted to partner with us. So we went to churches. We went to every people who represented the community in government and showed them what we were doing and wanted them to get involved. And they did get involved. And we made a connection between the community and the resources of the community, which people were not attending to that. They were dealing with the family, but they weren't dealing with the context of the family.
And the other thing about what I really appreciated about the article was that you began at a very early time in the history of family therapy, paying attention to the difference between first order change and second order change.
Right.
It's a big deal, Harry. There really needs to be a change in relationships and a change in structure and organization to really create that nurturing environment to help suffering children heal.
The community has all kinds of resources, but we weren't paying attention to the resources of the community. Other people were taking advantage of it, but the people who needed it most were not taking advantage of it. And we needed to make a connection between those people and those resources, and it just seemed to me so obvious, but it was obvious to me because that's what I grew up with. I knew it because I lived it, and when we did that, the community responded, and we had people visiting various organizations and clinics and institutions visiting our clinic, and it worked. But it wasn't hard to set up, and it wasn't hard to make it happen.
But it wasn't simple for me. It was an important revelation for me when my neurons finally clicked. Was you took this idea from structural family therapy about isomorphic patterns and how isomorphic patterns can play themselves out across the context. And I thought you and your team demonstrated how you can take an isomorphic pattern, where the case example in the paper where the boy was acting up in school, and there was one teacher there that was critical of the boy, the other teacher there was supportive of the boy. Then when you interviewed the family, the father was supportive of the boy, the mother was critical of the boy, and you go, oh my God, how does this happen?
Having grown up in that environment, I knew, how do we mobilize it? How do we make people realize that they have control over their destiny? And if we reach out to them and say, these resources are available to you, but we have to get the people in government, representatives and mayors and so on, involved in our community. Okay, not just in some big, conceptual concept that sort of always seemed to miss us. And that happened. And when it happened, then people began to change because what they needed was available to them. And we helped to make that connection between them and their hospitals and their schools and whatever resources there were in the community. They belong to you, my friend, not just to somebody else. And it was a beautiful thing because it happened very naturally, and it just simply worked. But you had to really think of people living in context and not just living within the context of their families, but in the context of their families and their communities.
Was when you read Minuchin's work, he talked about families, the collapse of family organization and structure as disorganized. And you said you prefer the word underorganized.
Right.
It was a big deal, Harry. Because again, it's less judgmental, it's less pathologizing, it's more descriptive. Can you talk a little bit about that?
One thing, it's non-judgmental, okay? Because what we're looking at was we're looking at why families have trouble making things happen, taking care of the problems that they have. And what do they need? They need to get themselves working together so that they can find a way of making things happen. And we needed to get therapists thinking, not in terms of pathology, but in terms of, these are families, they're struggling, they're in pain. Help them to help themselves, and help them to help themselves in a way that is not, accusing them and saying they're lazy or this or that or the other, but saying that, this is what you need to do in order to make this happen. So let us help you make it happen. It's such an obvious thing, but it's not obvious until you make it happen. And then it works. And they say, wow, this is terrific. They enjoyed being with us. They saw what strengths they had. Okay, they realized that they had control over their environment if they worked together. And we worked with them to work together. Thinking of the families, but thinking of the families in context, okay, it gave us something to work with that really made a difference in their lives. And once that happened, they just enjoyed being together. They enjoyed doing things together. They enjoyed in making things happen. Okay, and so we helped them make things happen in their own community so that community worked for them.